as a small business owner, one of the hardest things that I recall from like going from 5 people to 25 people or 25 to 50, it's always this thing like, okay, now I'm at this magic number. Now what new regulation do I have to deal with, right? Oh, you're an employee of 5 people, you have to follow this regulation, and you do this much in revenue, so you fall in this bucket. And you got federal, you got state, and then once you introduce a local, that's where all of a sudden you become overwhelmed and you start saying, you know what, actually, I'm going to look outside these city limits, and I'm just going to go 5 miles north of here. And all of a sudden, I'm following just regular state and federal laws, which, by the way, are difficult enough to follow just because they're complex, right? And when you're an employer of 10 people, you lack the resources to either pay for an attorney or have an internal attorney. It's no easier when you're 240 people, but you're more experienced and you do have some additional resources. When you're 10 people, which that's where our community thrives. The 10 employees and less or 20 employees and less, they're carrying this entire community. The big guys, they're super impactful and they're super helpful, but we have hundreds of those kind of people. So how can we get that message to our leaders that, guys, you can't come up. How about you adopt the state and federal rules, and if you're not happy with those, elect folks to make a change at that level, that everyone level the playing field.
It's a brilliant observation, astute observation. There's a cognitive dissonance between the reality of what it means to operate a business and what our elected officials think it means to operate a business. And I think what has happened is the folks that have been able to advance through caucus and primary parts of an election are so undereducated and so unexperienced on the business side of things that they don't realize the ramifications of decisions that they're making.
Right, they're making good decisions in their head. It's not like they have an evil intent.
But they just have no idea.
They've obviously never sat there from week to week and tried to make a $10,000 payroll work, and then have a new regulation come down the pipe that now tells them they need to have an extra 5 days of PTO because you're within the city limits. And I'm telling you, I'll give you a personal example.
Please.
At Westcom, we were in the city limits, and we decided we were renting, and it was just a small little shop. Well, as we grew, we realized in order to support our outer areas, we needed some additional space, and it was going to involve some manufacturing of different items and the like, and some headquarters. And so we started looking around. At the same time, there was a new ordinance introduced in Duluth for paid time off. And we already had a vacation policy, a PTO policy. I don't care if you're sick or if you're on vacation or whatever. We already have a policy, right? And it's for all of our employees all over the U.S. Well, okay, am I going to go down into the city of Duluth and find a place? And then at the same time, I start reading articles in the newspaper. I don't care if I think it was Moline maybe and these other folks who are battling out some pretty critical items that the city of Duluth should be taking a different approach on to encourage development. So I start reading all that, and my brother and I are going, wait a second, we find a garden center out on G. Duluth Road in the city of Rice Lake. Guess what we did? We went to the city of Rice Lake. Within 1 year, we were able to do additions. We have a beautiful property out there on 20 acres. We're paying upwards of $40,000 a year to the city of Rice Lake that has no reason not to go to the city of Duluth except the regulatory environment totally drove us. We had one priority when we looked for a shop outside the city of Duluth. And I don't like that. I love the city of Duluth. I have rental property there. I've lived there my whole life. It's not like I hate the city, but the administration has caused a person to make that kind of a decision. And now, when we first bought that facility, we were paying $15,000 in property tax. It's now $40,000 because we made that much improvement to a place. And the city of Duluth, and that's just little old Westcom, right? And I have real estate in North
It is a
Dakota.
beautiful facility out there, though. I've driven past it many times.
We're very fortunate. But we have our facilities in North Dakota and New Mexico, and I see the differences there from a regulatory standpoint. If I want to do something to those shops, it's easy. You get to work, and the property taxes follow suit. The communities have obviously realized that, hey, if we support this, it does come around and help us in the long run. And I hope I don't come across as saying the city of Duluth isn't doing anything right, because
You're not saying that at all.
They're doing what they can.
You're doing a great job of acknowledging the realities and challenges of operating in Duluth. There are amazing things about Duluth, amazing. And yet we do have a difficult environment for business.
And we can't, like you said, we can't leave out the state's role in this too. In the state of North Dakota, their maximum income tax is 4.5%. In Minnesota, it's nearly 10.
Yep.
Okay. So if I'm going to make a serious investment where the company is going to make money, why would I make that investment in Duluth when I can make the same investment in North Dakota
Yep.
and have, obviously, I'm a resident of Minnesota, so I just have to deal with the ramifications of it accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're picking on a Cirrus or something, why wouldn't they? You
Yep.
know that is a huge equation in their head,
Yes.
right? From an income tax standpoint. So we've talked about this economic conditions, we've talked about the business, and then we talk about community.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I wanted to go in that order is because if you don't have economic conditions,
Mm-hmm.
you can't have business. And I'm a firm believer that business supports community.
Yep.
At Westcom, this year our payroll will be about 35 million. Last year we did 18 million. That's the businesses do real things.
Yep.
They put real money in people's pockets.
Yep.
But how is a chamber supporting the community? Is it
Yeah.
only through those two things, or do you have other ideas that?
We have other ideas. I want to step back for 1 second and complete kind of you were on a really great riff there on regulatory things and elections. And elections have consequences. And I think because of the dynamics of the extreme politics that we have going on, it makes it really hard to be right or left of center, moderate, pragmatic, like let's put business first. So one thing that we're trying to do at the chamber is we hadn't had a policy person on our staff in a decade, but way before my time. So I've hired 4 people, 3 women and 1 male, and hired a policy person. That was the first person that I hired because we needed that. He spent the entire session basically down at the state capitol, and now we're here working locally on things. And what we've realized is it is really hard to get a business-friendly candidate elected in this market. And it's because the residents, as a voting base, don't understand necessarily the values of business until it's gone, until it's too late. So what we're trying to do instead is, again, on that proactive note, get out and explain to every and anybody who's trying to get elected why you need to prioritize X, Y, and Z. And that's where we've had some success on things. There was going to be a property, the Kemp's building, that is a little bit west of the Craft District, that a developer is in a purchase agreement to buy. It needed to switch from mixed-use business to the Forum District so that it could be housing. We need housing. 120 units. They were going to do a $35 million project there. The council was going to pull it off the agenda and table it because they were concerned about it being converted into hotel because of what was happening at a different property. I spent the weekend working with city councilors to explain to them the value of this. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that's what it takes right now with elected officials, is educating them on what the not even unintended consequences anymore, but what are the consequences of your actions now. And so we were able to get them to keep that on the agenda. It passed unanimously. Now we're going to get 120 units of housing there. So one of the things that we're trying to do around elections, around the regulatory system, is to get out in front of things, and instead of taking actions and then being instead of seeing elected officials take actions and then being reactive, is getting out in front and saying, you shouldn't do this, don't do this, and then maybe even having our profile grow enough, and we've doubled our staff, and so hopefully we can do this, but have our profile be big enough where we are looked to as the voice of reason. So elected officials come to us and say, what do you think we should do about this? What about this? And we can be that fiscally conservative, socially live and let live group that a chamber should be, and have this community move in the right direction. So then to segue that into community progress, I agree with you completely. We can't have community progress without economic development and great business conditions. In addition to that, what we're trying to do is, we've got a huge workforce crisis going on right now. The SETI population, so systemically, economically disadvantaged individuals, that includes veterans, that includes women, that includes people of color, that includes indigenous people, are unemployed at rates much higher than you and I. If we can connect that population with employers, we would be able to fill a lot of those gaps in the workforce. We have a military affairs committee that works with the MACV, that works with the Legions and works with other veteran groups, VFWs, and we are trying to get people who are either right now coming out of service, whether they're retiring after 4, 6, 8, 20, get them connected with employers. And now there's a portal to do that we're working on. That would be one. We're doing a Women in Leadership Conference this fall to try to connect women with leadership roles. I think during the pandemic, when more people decided to pull their kids out of daycare, and daycare is a whole nother crisis. I've got young kids. But it disproportionately affected women in the workforce. So what we're trying to do now, and you don't see that reflected in the unemployment number because unemployment, it reflects only people who are looking for work. It doesn't reflect people who are on the bench not looking for work. So we're doing a Women in Leadership Conference trying to get them connected to leadership roles within the community. And then within our BIPOC community that's unemployed at rates much higher, we are working on small business grants, on workforce things, and on trying to connect them with jobs within this community also. So that is part of the community piece beyond creating excellent business conditions, beyond creating economic development, but to create community progress and prosperity, connecting some of those groups with the needs of the business community, which right now it's workforce, to make sure that we do as good of a job as we can of getting them employed. St. Luke's and Essentia are desperate for employees across the board, from people who, they have jobs where you need your medical degree. They have jobs where you need a high school diploma. They have jobs where you don't need anything. I mean, they've got it across the board. And the same goes for our manufacturing community. The same goes for higher ed. We've got jobs that across the board anybody could step into. And so we're trying to connect those dots here. And in doing so, create more prosperity across the community.
The reason why I think business is so important in that and economic conditions is people need to feel some success in their life.
Amen.
And if we can get that,
It's a great
that
point.
indigenous people, the people of color, the disadvantaged folks, if they can go and try a position, no matter what it is, and they start feeling some wins in their life, wins build upon themselves, and then a whole community can move forward. With that community, there's businesses underlining support it, economic conditions prosper, and everybody wins. It's one of the reasons why it was important for my brother and I as we thought about business succession planning was, how do we, we had private equity groups approaching us, asking us to buy us and all that stuff, but every time we'd sit down, it was all about how can we squeeze more money, right? And it always boiled down to your largest expense is payroll, let's squeeze. That's not my gig.
That's PE.
Right. Let's figure out how we can make this long-term and succeed, right? And there's nothing wrong with PE. I don't care. Just wasn't my objective. And now there's all these folks who are basically just continuing to do what they were doing already, showing up to work, but now they have an additional win. They have some ownership stake in the company, and in 30 years when they retire, hopefully that's worth something, right?
Did you see an immediate shift in pride and confidence?
Well, so we just literally, we made this announcement with our Duluth team on Friday morning, and then Monday we flew down to New Mexico. We had a company meeting Tuesday morning, made the announcement there. Wednesday morning with our North Dakota team. So, I mean, in these meetings, you could feel the energy, right? They're excited for what it means, and I think there's some apprehension because the negative connotation on a business owner is like, oh, okay, so how did you just screw me, right? Tell me a little bit more. But I think there's a lot of excitement. Even if they're not excited, I'm excited because I know it's the right thing for them.
It is the right thing. It's a generous thing. Kudos to you and your brother for doing that.
Well, obviously, when you have a team like we have, it's easy to do, right? And totally exceeded our wildest imagination ever. I mean, you go back 9 years ago and we're 5 people, and today we're this large and just doing cool things. It's an easy decision to make, especially because I don't care about the next 5 years. I care about the next 30. And like I told our team, I don't want my son owning the company just because he's my son. I want the right person to own the company to ensure that, or to be leading the company, to ensure that it's a long-term success. Because for you and your children, I go down to New Mexico and you want some communities that are hurting.
Yes.
I mean, it's terrible. That's where Duluth, we had our highway cleanup today. We were walking along I-35 up on Thompson Hill. We adopt 2 miles of the highway. And we were commenting about this when we got back to the office. We've done it for a few years. The first year was a little bit more challenging. Lots of garbage, lots of bags. And this year we were done within an hour and a half. And we're thinking, what's going on here? And is it like wrong of us to wish more people threw more stuff out the window? Like we're looking for garbage to pick up, right? If you went to New Mexico, It would take you a whole day to do 2
Wow.
miles, if not more, right?
Wow.
So we do a lot of good things
Yeah.
up here. It's not
Yeah.
like Minnesota is all bad,
Yeah.
and specifically Duluth. But if we could do better with the communities and businesses and economic conditions, boy, we could get our kids to stay here. We
Yep.
could have our grandkids stay here,
Yep.
and we could have folks who have money. When we flew in yesterday, I happened to remark as we were taxiing down the runway, look at all those private planes
Yep.
and all those private.
Yep.
That people have money.
Yep.
The money is here, and it could be put to really good use right here, rather than going to Wisconsin and making an investment or some other state, right? If it was done here, things could really, really go well. How do you feel about the whole legislative session in Minnesota, just quickly, especially specifically with the what did they call it, the Safe and Healthy Workplace Act?
Yeah, we can talk about that. I do want to commend you on an incredible job that you've done with the company, you and your brother, to get to the place where you've gotten, and the fact that you have enough foresight to have a succession plan. It is rare to have that kind of vision. There are many people who are in business leadership positions, ownership position, founder positions, and they just cannot do it because they're facing their own mortality. And so to be able to do it in a thoughtful way and in a way that not only protects the vision and integrity of your business, but helps your employees. And you're right, there initially always is skepticism, like, what are you doing? But it is a great thing. So I want to commend you for doing that. I meet with people every single day, and it's amazing how few have that vision and foresight. So kudos to you. Congratulations on that kind of success to be able to do that.
Yeah, thank you. If you run into those people, tell them to call me. I got reasons. I mean, we have to do it. We owe it.
Yeah.
We owe it to our
Yeah.
future.
The other thing, when you're taxiing and you see Monaco and you see Sears and you see all the private planes, I think one thing we need to do, and I'm going to tie this into the legislative session, is we need to keep that net worth here, and we need to make sure that there's going to be the biggest transfer of generational wealth over the next 15 years of all time as baby boomer money shifts. And that money could stay here in communities like this, or it could go to states like Florida. So Florida's an entirely different animal in a different world, but if our corporate tax rates go up, if we add an additional fifth tier for income taxes, if we do different things around estate and death taxes, I mean, we've got to be very careful that all of a sudden that money leaves the second that people are done working, instead of staying here building communities. I worked for the Palucci's for many years until they passed away. And then Andy Borg, who I'm very close with, I think the world of, and Brian Doherty. But you go around this community and you see the Palucci name on everything. They started Solvay Hospice House. They started Amber Wing. They started Palucci Hall, Bayfront Festival Park. And that was because they kept the money in the community that they made it in. So taking that and now moving that into the legislative session. I will start by saying at the 11th hour, there were a couple victories for Duluth in the construction side of things. So to get some of those bonding dollars helps our construction firms because it puts them to work. Let's use Kraus Anderson as an example. They're the general contractor on Spirit Mountain, on WLSSD, on LSC. So there's some work for them. So I don't want to overlook that. Beyond that, it was a very difficult session. You had mentioned earlier the safe and sick policy that we have here in Duluth. Well, the one that they're doing statewide now is concerning as far as businesses go. If you're going to do something like that, there should have been significant carve-outs for different sectors, for small employers, for seasonal workers, because it's going to be an immense burden on businesses. And if you have an employee that stacks time and takes off 20 weeks in a row, which is where it caps, you have to then fill that position for 20 weeks. But when that person comes back, they get that position. So what do you do with the person you just hired?
Give them a $4 an hour pay cut and see how that goes.
You have to do that. You have to lay them off. It's not thought through to that degree. Additionally, this means they have to create an entire new state department to oversee this.
400 employees that we're competing to get.
Which we're competing to get and we're paying for as taxpayers. So that's a difficult thing to do at a time when inflation is high, supply chain is still an issue, workforce is an issue, at a time when workforce is an issue, that's the best time to let market forces create competitiveness. So when you're struggling to get employees, what do? You try to create the best work environment and best compensation package you can. That's not the time to add in another layer of challenges for businesses. So it was a difficult session in that sense. It was a difficult session in how quickly things moved. Single party control is not an effective way of governing. There's not enough balance. We need balance in government. Another one that I have concerns around is cumulative impacts. So there was a bill passed, an environmental bill for cumulative impacts. Again, these things start as well intended, but they're not thought all the way through. So we have high air quality here in Duluth. The only time we dip low, and it's not even that low, but it's during Canadian wildfire, so a time like now. But we're nowhere near what Manhattan is experiencing. We still have good air quality. So to put in something like cumulative impacts, where you look at the past, present, and future, when a plant is looking to expand, whether that is Cub Foods or UMD or Cirrus or Moline or anything, is another burden on businesses. So if a permit took 3 years for Cirrus, think about it potentially taking another 18 months just to get it reviewed and approved. That is not just prohibitive, that's a deal breaker.
Well, because businesses, investors want returns,
Yep.
and they want security around
And the
that
time
return.
value of money means
Is
they don't
huge.
want to wait for 3+ years.
Especially when they're not sure. They have no
Yes.
idea how it's
Yep.
going to go, right?
Yep.
Think about how much of that mining stuff goes through all these political or
Yep.
all these permitting regulations, and it hits a final thing, and then it starts all
Yep.
over.
And that's the other thing. So both sides of my family are from Virginia. My dad's side all worked at Evelyn Taconite. My mom's side has all been in business, in banking and finance and owning nursing homes and things like that. But where we've gotten to with mining is that it's become a political football. It's no longer about reality and science and even our values. So we're okay with other countries doing it with zero standards whatsoever, child labor and things like that. And yet we're not okay doing it here with the strictest of standards. And my point has always been, set the goalposts, and then if you get through, and they should be stringent regulations, it should be strong environmental review. Anybody who lives in northeastern Minnesota wants to be able to fish, wants to be able to hunt, wants to be able to be outside. That's why we live here. That's why we deal with the winters. So set those standards and then allow for the science to take place and determine whether it's safe or not. But to keep moving the goalposts and now have it just whoever is in control in the federal government, it's just going to go back and forth. It's just going to go back. It's just a pendulum that swings. And that's not good for anybody.
Well, it's really hard to attract investment, and without investment, it's hard to keep. It's
How
hard
do
to
we
keep
get
communities.
to 100% renewable without the minerals that we sit on?
It is an incredible. We deal in the energy business. A big portion of ours is in oil and gas. We love solar. We love renewables too, because we understand we have to do a transition. And I could go on about this subject so passionately. Like, folks, we have to understand where we want to get to. It's that this whole thing, time plus hard work equals a win. All right, what does a win look like? 100% renewable? Okay, let's get some time and let's get some hard work. But along the way, guess what? I'm not willing to walk to work yet. I'm not willing to freeze to death in the winter. I'm not really ready to sacrifice a child to heat my home yet. These things are real things, right? I have solar on my home and I have solar at our business. And in the January, they don't help me any.
That's right.
So I still need natural gas to help me in those months, right? Doesn't mean I don't love my solar system. I do. But we have to figure out battery storage. Oh, what does that equal? More minerals, right? Where do we get those minerals? Oh, we can't. Okay, fellas, what are we doing here? We define the win. It looks like 100% renewable. We're not pumped that we have to do more mining to get there, but we understand that in order to get there, we have to include that piece, if that's where you are at. I have my own personal opinion on it, but we can all share in that. Let's define the win, and then let's put together the pieces to get there. That's the only way you get somewhere in life. This state of New Mexico, interestingly enough, had done something similar to the state of Minnesota in regards to a Safe and Healthy Workplace Act. Because we have to follow this crazy law there. And literally our payroll provider, a large payroll provider, ADP, had to spend tens of millions of dollars to figure out how to even track the blasted thing to get it done, right? Guess what's going to happen in Minnesota? Our employees are no longer going to have a vacation policy that's driven by their desires.
Yep.
It's going to be driven by the desires of some fella in St. Paul who figured he knew better
Yep.
what our wonderful marketing specialist Haley needed for time off.
Yep. Yep.
And I think it's wrong, but I don't know what to do about it. I can't have both.
Yeah.
We'd be belly up, right? And not to mention, I go back to this whole thing that now you have a 0.7% payroll tax,
Yep.
right? So now you got another 10-person company
Mm-hmm.
who's got to figure out, what does that even mean? How do I track it? How do I pay it? Now I have another form to fill out that, by the way, my customer, my end user finds no value in that form.
Right.
So I have to pass that cost off to the consumer. But why do they care about that form, right? It's just additional pressure on these
Yep.
people who are trying to do the right thing. These are folks who literally supported the local skating rink so 80 kids could enjoy the
Yep.
night off.
Yep.
They're not some wealthy, evil person.
No.
They're real people behind that computer just
Yeah.
trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And that program, they already know is going to be upside down.
Yep.
They know that the money isn't going to be
It's
there.
not there.
And so where did we miss it? And I put the blame at myself on this one. I never went to St. Paul. I sent a couple letters, but it's like, how did they not have
Well,
any idea what the implications of this
Yeah,
is
we
gonna
were
be?
down there a bunch on it, and unfortunately, because there was one party control, and a lot of the folks that got elected were far left people, rather than pragmatic people in the middle. The writing on the wall was this thing was going through, and so what we were very frustrated by is it was going through, but why weren't there exemptions for if you want to support small business, exemptions for 50 employees of 50 and below, employers of 100 and below, seasonal employees? Like, why weren't those exemptions put in place to make it at least palatable for businesses? Because your point about a 10-person business, they can't, I mean, they have enough time managing their receivables and their payables and everything else, let alone this entirely new thing. So what happens then is, if all of a sudden the pendulum swings and it's one party controlling the other side, then all of it goes away and it just keeps swinging back and forth. And that's where, if you don't have balance and moderation and pragmatism, it just is going to go like that.
And you're going to have a bunch of head swingers,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. I used to be in business to energize America. Now I'm in business to figure out what the Sam Hill I'm supposed
Yep.
to do about the latest regulation,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's disappointing to me. And I also think the idea that you're somehow supposed to keep an open position for somebody for that long
Yeah.
of time and then be able to make them whole when they come back is difficult. And if you leave it to the private industry, guess what, folks? I have a hard enough time finding, attracting, and retaining employees. So I do everything we can to
Nailed it.
already support
Nailed
that.
it.
I had a safety meeting a month ago in Watford City, North Dakota, with 70 of the coolest electricians and automation techs you could ever find. We had an awesome time together. We do a quarterly meeting. We left the next night. One of our 58-year-old electricians suffered a massive stroke. And our team rallied $16,000 in the matter of 24 hours to support him and his family.
Wow.
It was just immediate. They had the money. So we go out to announce our ESOP, and he comes to the city. He asks, "Can I please come to this company meeting?" And I tell him, "Tim, if you're feeling well, please come."
Yeah.
Right? He comes and he sits down, and he barely makes it in there, and just an awesome, emotional little reunion between him
Yeah.
and his team members. Right? But the fact is that his position is still open for him. Because if I dared fill his position, our team would kill me.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
happens if you leave
Yeah.
it to private industry.
Yep.
They figure it out without
Yep.
any need
Yep.
for me filling out some
Yeah.
18th form,
Yep.
writing down something, right? It's just, I really am disappointed by this legislative
Absolutely. I think that there's we kind of started by talking about how, business needs to be a good word. It should not be an evil word. Nowadays, profit should not be a bad word. It's an important word. Nonprofits sit on more profit than a lot of for-profit businesses. So now we're just semantics. It's no longer this era of the robber barons when it was Rockefeller and guys like that who had people dying in their plants and stuff. We're not in that era anymore. The competitive market now forces employers to do things to keep their employees. And so that's not the time to pile on more regulation. That's the time to let employers do what they have to do to hire people. In the hospitality industry, it became so hard post-pandemic and even during the pandemic to hire kitchen workers that Duluth had the highest increase in kitchen wages of any part of the state just because they allowed market forces to take place. I think this isn't the exact amount, but it was something like it went from $14 or $15 an hour up to $20 an hour just in a summer as an aggregate. And that's what happens when, and right before that, what was being discussed is setting a citywide minimum wage. But the market dynamics allowed for it to be actually higher than that. So you're absolutely right that there should be more left to the private markets. Adding more layers of government is not a good thing right now. I think what they should be focusing on is making the departments that they have more effective. The MPCA is impossible to get permitting from.
Oh, I used to work at WSSD. I got some stories about that.
Yeah.
That was, I often thought a quasi-government agency going up against another government agency, real wise use of our taxpayer dollars here.
Yeah.
It's too bad that we've found ourselves that way. I do think that, again, there's a role to be played in regulation, but in strong economic times, which, in my opinion, for the next 50 years, 40 years, until the baby boomer generation is fully, out of the workforce and we've adapted to this new way of doing business and there's innovation and technology catches up, we are in a tough labor force. I mean, that is not going to go away. So you're right about it. Now is not the time for additional regulation. Now is the time for businesses to do what they do best. One of the challenges we've had in the energy business is it's a bunch of hardworking folks, right? And hardworking folks don't like to take the time to either brag about what they've accomplished, nor do they like to get out and do tons of policy advocacy because it takes time. And they would rather go do their time in making sure that your house is kept warm this winter, right? And so I think that we do need to start capturing more of the positives about businesses. And I know I have some work to do even to go back and kind of like do a big press release and announce all the businesses that helped us in our little rink project, for instance, right? To help drive the story that, guys, business is not bad. Business is actually a very important piece. I went to a environmental education day at Lakewood School a couple weeks ago, and I think there was 7 different businesses there educating these children. Right?
Let us help tell that story through our foundation also.
Absolutely.
Of the positives of business.
Well, and that's where I was going to kind of segue into, Matt, is that I commend the chamber, and I know it's hard work, and you guys are up against a ton of challenges, and it probably feels like it was a big baseball game that was you knew you were going to lose going into this legislative session.
It was a tough one.
It was a tough one for businesses, but you got some good innings in there, right? You did some good things, and some people came up on the top. Let's just make sure that the chamber continues to have good leaders like Matt doing awesome things like you're doing, and I know you guys will end up pulling us all forward. And I certainly appreciate it as a business owner in the Duluth area to be able to lean on the chamber through some financial support and know that you guys are putting those dollars to effective use to drive that mission. And I love those 3 pillars: business, community, and economic. It's what supports everything.
Yeah, thank you.
So congrats, and keep up the good work at the chamber as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And thanks for coming on.
It's been a privilege. I'd love to come back.
We have lots more to talk about, Matt.
I know.